In just the last 48 hours, we've seen Israel use American weapons to wipe out an entire village in South Lebanon, massacre children and families sheltering in schools in Jabalia, and kill Yahya Sinwar, who was martyred in a firefight on the front lines of battle against the occupation. Last week, we just eclipsed a year of genocidal escalation in Gaza, in which Lebanese forces have been a support front for the Palestinian resistance, one in which Sinwar fought for years and for which he has now become an eternal symbol. His death comes as the war has already entered a new phase beyond the active ethnic cleansing and reoccupation of Gaza, where the West Bank and South Lebanon are in play, as we see renewed imperial propaganda about a quote, new Middle East. Both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris celebrated Sinwar's death today as both a victory and an opportunity to end the war, without mentioning, as Tarek Boukoni said today, the power they've had for months on end to end it themselves. Instead, the U.S. under this administration has provided and continues to provide unprecedented and unabated military support and political cover for Israeli war crimes. Today's conversation is aimed at helping us understand the political history and dynamics in the region, the aims of the rampaging Israeli regime in Lebanon, and the long-term goals of its benefactor and partner in crime, the waning global power that is the United States. We have the rare fortune of having three comrades with us with deep connections and understanding of Lebanon and the region. To help us understand the situation on the ground, the resistance forces, and the internal politics and alignment of political forces in Lebanon right now, we're joined by journalist, researcher, and co-host of the Delete Your Account podcast, Roqayah Chamseddine. To shed light on the history of U.S.-Israeli interventions and wars on Lebanon and the connection to Palestine, we have Rayan El-Amine, a lecturer in race and resistance studies at San Francisco State University, who previously worked at the American University of Beirut and is a community organizer, former director, and current member of AROC. And finally, to put all of this into context and help us analyze U.S. imperial ambitions and the resistance movements to those ambitions in the Swana region, as well as how the global political terrain is engaging in this expanding war, we have a longtime friend of AROC and CPE, the journalist and renowned historian Vijay Prashad, the author of a veritable library of books of political theory and history, including two recent offerings with the legendary Noam Chomsky, The Withdrawal, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, and the Fragility of U.S. Power, and On Cuba, which was just published this year. Roqayah, Rayan, and Vijay, we're deeply honored to have all of you with us together today. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules. And Rayan, I want to turn it over to you first, as you've not only played a key role in bringing this event together, but also because you are the connective tissue with Roqayah and Vijay.
Thanks, Thomas, for that introduction. I just want to do a quick thank you for Vijay to joining us today, and Roqayah. I've known Vijay for a long time, maybe over 30 years, but we spent the most significant and quality time in Lebanon together. And he knows the region very well, and he knows Lebanon really well, and we're just happy to have him to give us a big picture of what's going on. Roqayah is a homie. She's from the south. She's Janubi like myself. So we're already, even though we're just getting to know each other, we're close politically and spiritually. So welcome to both of you. I'm not going to take any more time. I'll just pass it on to Roqayah because we do have limited time in terms of our introductory remarks, and then we'll kind of open it up for a more organic discussion. So with that, Roqayah, ahlan wa sahlan, tfaddali. Go ahead and
أهلا فيك. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for having me today. I'm especially honored to be here amongst comrades like Vijay and Rayan. I wanted to talk briefly about my coming home to Lebanon. I decided after the war, the genocide began in Gaza, that I couldn't live outside of Lebanon anymore, and I wanted to come back. And I've been living in the Dahia since coming back home. And I've witnessed things that I never thought I would witness in the Dahia specifically. The devastation caused by American munitions is catastrophic. There are actual craters in the ground in the Dahia as though they're being excavated. And for many of us who live in the Dahia, the suburb is absolutely unrecognizable now. I've been back since the recent wave of attacks and was actually caught in the Dahia during an Israeli raid, and was greeted not just by the craters I mentioned, caused by US bunker busters, but the pungent smell of white phosphorus, which is very sulfuric, almost garlicky. It will not leave you. Now, the syndicate of chemists in Lebanon has also accused Israel of using depleted uranium in the attacks on the Dahya. The munitions that were used by the Israeli Air Force Squadron who carried out the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah on the 27th of September was equipped with BLU-109 missiles. And they're known to be coated in depleted uranium. And I want to emphasize this point for everybody. Oh, excuse me, that this is a war, not just an Israeli war, but a US-Israeli war, using US supplied munitions, US supplied aircrafts, and US supplied intelligence. And as a result of the aggression on Lebanon, there are now over 2,412 martyrs and at least 11,267 wounded, according to the Ministry of Health. And despite what we're facing, the people of Lebanon, specifically the people of South Lebanon, they adhere to the tenets of revolutionary optimism. So the atmosphere here, you feel a sense that people are on edge. They're worried about one another because we are facing a very merciless enemy, especially those of us who are displaced. But we're pushing forward because we know that this path is long and we understand what we're up against. That this confrontation is not just with Israel, but with Western imperialism. And the sacrifices that we make are for something much greater than ourselves. We know that without the liberation of Palestine, we are incomplete. And you hear that from everyone, from the Dahi to the Junub. I also wanted to talk about this, how most Lebanese understand that these attacks are targeting us collectively. In the words of James Baldwin, it's, if they come for you in the morning, they're going to come for me at night. So we understand it's our moral duty as Lebanese people to counter this pervasive sectarian propaganda and hold tight to unity. And thankfully, we've come together to support one another. There are many communities across Lebanon who, after the wave of communications attacks, took vans and buses and taxis all together so they can donate blood. So even in the face of the US-Israeli project to divide and turn us against each other, we've come together. Israel's enemy has never been Hezbollah, just Hezbollah or Harakat Amal or Hamas or the PFLP. No, the enemy for the US and Israel is the very fragrance of resistance. And this is the scent of our entire nation, of our entire people. And so sowing discord by way of sectarianism is one method that they've attempted to use historically to extinguish this resistant society. And they failed and will continue to fail. One thing that was really interesting was Amos Hochstein, who's the top national security advisor for the Biden administration. He went on LBC and did an interview, and he had a really interesting slip of the tongue. He says the US is going to select Lebanon's president, and then immediately corrected himself and said, no, the Lebanese will be electing their president. So their mission, the US's mission, is to install a pro-US government that would in turn seek to drive out Hezbollah. And so there are both internal and external attempts to divide Lebanese people and turn them against each other. Another specific method has been Israel's targeting of buildings that house displaced people. They're creating an atmosphere of apprehension for any community that is willing to house people from the south or the Dahya. Even the way Israel is characterizing the attacks on our villages, they're not saying Lebanese villages or southern Lebanese villages. They're actually describing them as Shia villages. There are Israeli politicians who have been very clear from the beginning that the belligerents in their eyes are the Shia. Israel's foreign affairs minister described all Lebanese Shia as a hostile population, and that's because sectarianism is the lifeblood of imperialism in our region. So the United States, through Israel, has always used its influence via direct involvement, via proxies, to try and dictate the political makeup of our government. But they've failed so far. And I do believe, based on my interviews with people here, based on knowing my community as intimately as I do, that this is something that will fail. And I'm really grateful that despite everything that we faced, the Hezb took really heavy blows with the communications attack. I was there for the killing of the child martyr Muhammad Kanj, and the attack on his funeral and the funeral for other martyrs. And I saw firsthand how devastating this is on us and how brutal it is. But afterwards, people are still facing the situation head on without fear. So Israeli invincibility is a myth to us. It's a myth broken every single day by the resistance on the battlefield. Since October 1st, when Israel announced their Operation Northern Arrow, which was meant to bring back all the displaced northerners in their settlements, Hezbollah announced Operation Khaybar. And in the last 2 weeks alone, Israeli occupation forces have been unable to advance beyond a few hundred meters before being met by resistance, despite all the videos they're putting out of destroying our villages, of planting their flag. The Lebanese resistance has thwarted each and every Israeli effort to advance into South Lebanon. 3 days ago, we watched the burning of a Merkava tank in Labuna on live television. And until now, the entity's losses in Merkava tanks alone since the start of their ground invasion has reached, 21 in 18 days. And I'm not very good at math, but that's a little over one tank a day. Yesterday, there was 4 in one day. So the blows suffered by the Hizb are heavy, especially the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. But what Israel fails to understand, even after their defeat in 2000, after we threw them out of our villages, after their defeat in 2006, our determination and our faith in the resistance is unmatched because, like in the words of Ghassan Kanafani, bodies fall, but ideas endure. It isn't because we're a culture of death that we're steadfast and we're committed to armed resistance. It's because we're faced with two choices here. Either we live as subjects of Western imperialism and subjects of our occupier and their proxies, or we fight. And so we refuse to live a life of humiliation. It's because of our unwavering love of life for our people and our people in Gaza that we fight and we endure. And what has been really powerful for me has been watching the relationship between members of the axis of resistance, namely Palestinian factions, and the Lebanese resistance, because it's ironclad. And it's partially due to the historic organized resistance before even Israel's occupation. In the 1930s and 1940s, the region of Jabal Amid, what's now known as South Lebanon, it was an integral part of the Palestinian struggle. So our people in Jabal Amid were supporting Palestinian resistance fighters with weapons, with ammunitions, and with our own men. And our villages served as a pillar of resistance, and that continues today. It's a relationship that can't be broken, which is why Hezbollah not only entered this battle on October 8th, but has remained committed to it, despite how many martyrs have been sacrificed on the path to Jerusalem. And one thing I want to emphasize here is something that always moves me. All of the communications that is released by Hezbollah that disclose, what their operations are, what settlements are being hit, what military bases they're striking, they all begin the same way, which is in support of our steadfast Palestinian people in Gaza and in solidarity with their noble resistance and in defense of Lebanon and its people. Because we know we're one, our path is one, and our victory is one. We adhere to these three things: steadfastness, which is our ideology; dignity is our currency; and armed resistance is our duty. And I want people to understand that none of you are helpless in this. We have no right to feel helpless or to despair. You have to realize that people with less than you in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, they've sacrificed all that they have for this battle, their homes, their villages, their families, knowing that it'll be long and it'll be painful. And yet the confidence in victory and in our resistance is growing by the hour. And I've seen it with my own eyes, the crimes of this entity, but also the resilience of my people. There was a recent interview done with a man from South Lebanon who said the Israelis think that they're the masters of the sky, but we are the masters of the earth. So if a new Middle East is going to be born, it's going to be born on our terms and through our arena. It's either us or us, and there's no other equation that we're willing to accept. So to finish, I guess I want to emphasize that the path before us is difficult, but we're walking it together. And I have no doubt that we will overcome and we will be victorious.
Thanks so much, Roqayah. Yeah, I mean, you represent why we Southerners, myself included, from South Lebanon, are so proud to be part of people of resistance, people who are fighting back during a time when there was genocide, a small part of the world that actually stood up while everybody else was quiet as the genocide in Gaza had started. So I'm proud to be from the same place as you are. And you're right, it is a culture of resistance, but it's not just based on um, fighting back, but it's based on dignity
Right.
and reclaiming uh, our land and liberating uh, Palestine and obviously defending the south of Lebanon. Uh, I want to just very quickly tell you what I'm gonna, uh, talk about the three main points. One is kind of an overview. You've already started about what's happened in the last 3 weeks in Lebanon, um, with the support front that the Lebanese resistance started on October 8th. Uh, that was based on supporting and being in solidarity with Palestine until there's a ceasefire. Uh,
Right.
and I want to talk about why a small country like Lebanon is so important to U.S. intervention, um, and what the new Middle East mantra is all about. It's been used before by the US mostly. We'll talk about that. And then just very little at the very end. I might leave it to the discussion part about what is the Israeli strategy in Lebanon. Roqayah has already kind of talked a little bit about kind of the divide and conquer, the sectarian wars, the things that the United States has used before in its occupation of Iraq, but also it's been used in Lebanon. So let's start with the current situation and the fact that the front in Lebanon started as a result of solidarity with Palestine. And then the last 3 weeks, it's been an open war on the Lebanese by Israel. It's pretty much the same thing that uh, Israel always uses, a civilian terror campaign, as it's been using in Gaza for the last year, attacking hospitals, schools, and such. Uh, we heard the numbers of how many killed, over 2,400 killed, 100,000 injured in Lebanon, and over 1.25 million, that's 1.25 million displaced. But I do want to kind of point out a couple of things that have to do with the, kind of the arming and just the absolute horrific amount of bombs that that Israel has dropped on the Dahi, which is the suburbs of Beirut. In just one night, when they did assassinate the Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, the U.S. dropped, I mean, Israel dropped as many bombs as the U.S. dropped in the whole time it invaded Iraq in 2003. So in one night, they dropped as many tonnage of bombs, bunker buster bombs, on this one residential block as the U.S. had dropped during the whole invasion of Iraq, and that's according to the U.S. Naval Institute. Um, so after this assassination of the Secretary General and the blows that Israel did end up having against the resistance in Lebanon, they've quickly increased, their goals in terms of what they're trying to do in Lebanon. There is 5 divisions and almost 80,000 troops, Israeli troops, now amassed at the north of occupied Palestine and south of Lebanon. And there is one objective. It has nothing to do with bringing back the settlers to the north. It has to do with Israel coming in, occupying a buffer zone in Lebanon, like they've done before. But just like they did in 1982, they went in against the PLO, but also all the resistance movements that existed that were there in Lebanon in 1982 during the Civil War. But 18 years later, they were kicked out. Uh, so that situation of 1982 is probably more similar to what's happening now, as far as the Israeli war on Lebanon, as opposed to what a lot of people have been talking about in terms of comparing the current Israeli war on Lebanon to the 2006 war, which I think in the end had also much more limited objectives. Uh, to my second point, and I'll try to move quickly with this. This has all been done as far as the Israeli invasion, obviously with the U.S. support, and now the U.S. sees as another possibility to try to make the region, the New Middle East, the so-called New Middle East, a docile and subjugated pro-Western area that is under the thumb of the United States and Israel. And Lebanon's been super important for the United States. I don't know if people know how important it has been as far as intervention in the Middle East, mainly because Lebanon is important because it's close to Palestine, it's close to Israel. And secondly, because it's a weak state and it's always been kind of a battleground for interventions throughout the Cold War and after. A couple of just timeline bullet points. In 1958, the U.S. Marines actually invaded Lebanon for the first time. And that time they came in to intervene in a Cold War a battle against Arab nationalists and leftist Lebanese that were gaining momentum against the right-wing pro-Western government of Camille Chamon at that time. So that was a short intervention, but it had 5,000 Marines that invaded Lebanon. Today, the U.S. has pulled up 2 aircraft carriers, has 40,000 troops in the region in order to support Israel. So this is kind of like the two bookends of interventions. Today's presence of the United States in the region is very much an intervention. They're very much involved in what's happening in Lebanon and what's happening in Palestine. An interesting little anecdote also as far as U.S. interest in Lebanon, it's building one of the most expensive and the biggest embassies in the whole world. This is a U.S. embassy in Lebanon. Lebanon has a population of about 5 million, and it's building $1 billion embassy. This is equivalent to an embassy that is in Iraq, where the U.S. is trying to recoup the investment of decades of occupation. So it's not unusual the U.S. would have a big investment there. But also the second most expensive embassy is the UK, an ally in Europe. It makes sense for the US to have a $1 billion embassy in the UK. But Lebanon, a country the size of Rhode Island, has an embassy that is $1 billion, and it will be a military base, an intelligence base, let's say, for sure, a surveillance base in the region. And so Lebanon calculates highly in terms of U.S. control of the region, the embassy, and the multiple interventions. I won't go through too many things right now as far as the timeline as much as I wanted to. I don't know if Thomas can also kind of give me a heads up if where I'm at as far as timing, but I just want to touch on a few things. The U.S. obviously came in to support Israel in 1982. and they ended up uh, very much, getting repelled and pushed out as a result of their support for Israel, which had gone all the way up to Beirut in 1982. As a result, there was one of the biggest attacks against U.S. forces on the U.S. Marine barracks that was bombed. Uh, 241 Marines were killed at that time. That was the deadliest day for U.S. forces in 1983 against the Marines since the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, to kind of just give you an idea. Um, so in 2006, I mean, in 2000, after the Israelis were kicked out in 2000, uh, there was obviously what they left as a result of that invasion when Israel pulled out was a strong resistance movement. Hezbollah and Hamas came out of occupation and oppression and resistance. And that's something that the Israelis and that the United States never learned, don't understand in terms of occupation and the fact of where this resistance comes from. Uh, in the Israeli war against Lebanon in 2006, Condoleezza Rice uh, came to Beirut and said that the war on Lebanon is the birth pangs of a new Middle East, birth pangs of a new Middle East. So they always see these wars as a way to remake the Middle East uh, and make it, a region that is friendlier to Western interests and be an ally of Israel, which will never happen. It will definitely never happen after the genocide that's been happening over the last year. Whatever people that might have been collaborators to Israel will not be able to raise their heads anytime soon. Obviously, the U.S. and Israel can always find people like that in different countries. Um, uh, this idea of remaking the Middle East today is much more obscenely violent than it ever has been. The United States used to talk about remaking the Middle East as far as regime change or getting rid of a dictator or oppressive regime. They use terms like humanitarian intervention, but now it's all about war and the bombs from the air until you submit uh, to their military power. So, at the risk of ruining the surprise at the end before I run out of time, the new Middle East will only sow the seeds, or the idea of the new Middle East by the United States and Israel will only sow the seeds of resistance for generations to come. That's what we've seen historically. You can ask, the Algerians who resisted for many years. Over 1 million Algerians died before the French were kicked out, or you can talk about what happened in terms of Vietnam. And so that type of resistance and occupation only, that type of occupation and war only breeds resistance. Both Hezbollah and Hamas are part of the fabric of society. Those are the two resistance movements in Palestine and Lebanon. They're part of the fabric of society. You're not going to be able to uproot it by killing all the leaders or even killing thousands of them. Eventually, they will get their strength back. They will have new leaders. And as we've seen recently in Lebanon, Israel has had a hard time moving in a mile into Lebanon after 3 weeks of doing carpet bombing of the whole southern border and amassing thousands of troops and tanks and trying to go in. And what ended up happening, 50 Israeli soldiers dead, 500 injured, a hit on an Israeli Golani base further south in Israel, and around 200 rockets still being sent over from Lebanon into Israel. How this turns out isn't going to be as a result of Western diplomacy. It's going to be as a result of whether the resistance in Lebanon, it's putting a lot on the resistance in Lebanon, stops the invasion, or at least makes it very, very costly for Israel to go in. Um, I think what I want to do at this point is actually leave the last part around what the United States and Israel are trying to do as far as sectarian wars and putting in a puppet government. But I'll leave that till our discussion later, and hand it over to Vijay.
Yeah. Well, it's really great to be with you. And obviously, sometimes I wish that we could be talking about happy things, pleasant things, music or sport, or, people just being, people and enjoying a barbecue and sitting and having a drink and so on. But it seems that every time, at least in our lifetime, every time we talk about Lebanon or Palestine, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Egypt, it's about something quite horrible. And it's about often the aggression of the United States and Israel. The first thing to say is that it's, I think, a shaggy dog's tale to wonder who's the dog and who's the tail. Is the United States government being pushed by the Israelis, or are the Israelis pushed by the US government? I think we need to put that particular so-called conundrum to bed. They operate together. They operate as one. I don't see any difference. I think those who are under an illusion when they hear, let's say, an American president, and I'm not even going to name this one because it's really, they are replaceable in this respect. When they say things like we're trying to push Israel, or we're trying to, broker a deal, you can't broker a deal if you're a combatant in a conflict. And, the United States and Israel march together. So I think that debate or discussion or whatever is a waste of time. There is no, need to precisely calibrate who is really giving the orders. The fact is that they're operating together. The fact is they're operating together, and they're operating under a delusion, and have done so, in fact, since before the foundation of Israel, and since before the role of the United States increased in that region, which is the delusion of the West from the time of the mandates, with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, which is to say that the West, at the initial period with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, that the West, the French and the British, they should take care of the childlike Arabs. And the childlike Arabs need tutelage. Hence, these were mandates under tutelage of the Western powers. This is a continued idea. They still believe that. They still believe, in a way, quite, I think, openly, that the Arabs cannot rule themselves. They must be governed. And if they cannot govern directly, they must have the helping hand of the West behind them. Now, it's also true that the United States behaves like this in other countries. In Ukraine, for instance, we've often heard the words of Vicky Nuland, where she said, this guy is a good prime minister, not that guy. And I've read so many, State Department documents where, again, the United States picks people. In Venezuela, our preferred president, says the US government, is Mr. Guaido, not Nicolas Maduro. But we'll pick Guaido and impose him on the Venezuelan people. Lebanon has actually experienced this, let's say, its entirety of its modern history. The imposition, whether by France, sometimes the United Kingdom, and recent years, the United States, they impose who is an acceptable prime minister, who's an acceptable president. Mostly the presidents they've imposed, and they've not liked what they considered Syrian meddling. The Syrians cannot meddle, but the French can. This attitude that the childlike Arabs need tutelage is really the second point. There's nothing new. When they say we're going to create a new Middle East, it's the old Middle East. It's the Middle East where you have subordinate Arabs who are basically working for the Westerners. That's all it is. I mean, the problem with Hezbollah, the problem with Iran, the problem with this particular period of the Assad government in Syria, the problem with these people is that they are a little disobedient. That's their problem. If they were more obedient, such as like King Abdullah II, or if they were obedient, like President previously General Sisi, then everything is okay. It's disobedience that is not tolerated. And I use the word disobedience deliberately because it's children that are disobedient, and children therefore need to be disciplined by the adult, and the adult is the United States. And you could hire perhaps a nanny to take care of the disobedient children, and that nanny is General, now President Sisi, or King Abdullah II. They are the nannies of the disobedient Arabs. That's the attitude that the West has had for 100 years and continues to have. Every time they talk about a new Middle East, in fact, nothing new. It's a cliche because, as Rayan said, we've heard new Middle East talked about, for at least 50 years. But for 100 years, they've wanted to design the Middle East in their interest. And unfortunately, the Arabs, like all people, have their own ideas of sovereignty, have their own ideas of how they want to live. The Palestinians simply do not want to live under apartheid, under occupation, under permanent genocidal war. Don't want that. They want to live with dignity. That means they are being disobedient, because in the new Middle East, which is the old Middle East, the Palestinians are meant to suck it up and be happy to be second-class citizens and not expelled from the region. They should be pleased to have some kind of Israeli citizenship. I mean, Israelis say this to you all the time. There are Palestinians who have Israeli passports. Well, come off it. We know that they don't have the same rights as others. They can't, their families can't visit them, etc. That's the second point. The new Middle East is really the old Middle East, and the Arabs are meant to be children who need tutoring or have a nanny, but they cannot speak for themselves. And finally, this is a very important thing for me because, you see, I believe that Mr. Netanyahu entered into this particularly qualitatively different genocidal war in Gaza. This is a qualitatively different conflict than 2014 and all the previous bombardments. This is not like it was in 2014. This is an absolute annihilationist campaign. 2014 wasn't. It was punishing Hamas. Now they want to annihilate. It's a qualitatively different situation. And by the way, it's so qualitatively different. I challenge anybody to find images from any Ukrainian city where the Russians have bombed those cities in any manner like the Israelis are bombing in Gaza. I challenge you, because if there were those images, there would be wall-to-wall coverage in the Western media. There just isn't. Nobody has bombed. Even the Yanks didn't bomb Iraq like the Israelis are now bombing Gaza. It is qualitatively different, and how they are now bombing bits of Lebanon, including that 8-building or 6-building radius in the assassination of Syed Hassan Nasrallah. There's a qualitatively different war. And I believe that as the Israelis discovered world opinion was turning rapidly against them, and that, they felt somehow pushed to the wall, I believe that they are gaslighting the world. They want to convert this conflict from a genocide happening in Gaza to a war against Iran, to somehow that this conflict in Gaza, which is meant to eradicate Hamas, somehow is linked to Hezbollah, is linked to Ansar Allah, is linked to all the various factions in Iraq and Syria. And then let's just go and bomb Tehran, because then this becomes Europe's war. Europe right now is vacillating in its support of Israel, and they want to convert their genocide into a major regional war against Iran. Now, fortunately for us, the Iranians understand this and are quite clever and smart. So when they retaliated, and it's really important that people understand that after the assassination of Nasrallah, there were more black flags on Shia shrines, all the way from Sayyida Zainab shrine outside Damascus to almost every shrine in Iraq. There were more black flags on Shia shrines than there were when Ayatollah Khomeini died. That is the respect that people have for Syed Hassan Nasrallah. The Iranians had to retaliate. But bear this in mind, despite the fact that the Israelis maintain their intelligence and military complexes in the middle of civilian neighborhoods, in other words, using the Israeli population as civilian shields, despite that, the Iranians targeted military targets. Civilian casualties were almost null. They hit military targets precisely. Why? Because Iran does not want a regional war. It does not want the jaws of hell to open. The United States and Israel and the Europeans are being extremely reckless here. They want to extend this and to get everybody firing at everybody. And I must say, it is to the credit of the Iranians and others that they are not getting involved in a regional war. They don't want that. They want the genocide to end. They want the Israeli occupation of Lebanon to roll back. And in that point about the recklessness of the West and the sagacity, wisdom of the Iranians, I must say that the king of Jordan and the president of Egypt will forever go down in the gallery of scoundrels, because not even once have they threatened to tear up the 1979 Camp David agreement or the 1994 agreement that Jordan signed with Israel. Not even once did they threaten to walk away from those agreements, let alone actually walking away from those agreements and flying Jordanian and Egyptian jets over Gaza for a no-fly zone. What's the point, President Sisi? What's the point of spending billions of US dollars buying high-quality equipment if you're not even going to establish a no-fly zone over Gaza? A no-fly zone, which is something that the United Nations often talks about. They talked about this in Libya so glibly. We did it in Libya. Not one of the Arab countries with a large army has actually said, let's establish a no-fly zone, fly our jets over Gaza, tell the Israelis we're just not going to tolerate it any longer. Not one. Sisi and Abdullah II will go down as scoundrels in history. And I hope we will never forget that at no point did they actually take any active role to try to change the balance of forces around Israel. Sagacity from Iran, scoundrelness from the king and the president, recklessness from the United States and the Israelis, recklessness and inhumanity. I think that's very important. And I'm very happy that there are cycles of protest in the United States that continue despite the fact that some people say, well, nothing happens when you protest. In fact, that's a wrong attitude. A lot happens. Generations are being radicalized. As Rayan said, the resistance against this goes generation to generation to generation. As if you could even imagine that 50,000 people come on the streets of Cleveland, Ohio, and Netanyahu says, oh, I'm going to stop. Doesn't work like that. Politics doesn't work like that. It takes time, effort, changing the political balance of forces. And I'm very proud that people across the United States in particular, but also in Europe and other places in the world, particularly the United States, very proud that there have been cycles of protest. People have just not stopped coming out. That is so important. And I hope it continues up to beyond the election. Once the ceasefire happens, let these cycles of protest not end until the occupation ends.
Thomas, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. Thanks, Vijay and Roqayah and Rayan for those initial comments. I'm wondering if we can maybe continue on what Vijay has started us on in terms of what's the opportunities here for actually curbing this expansion of this regional war. I think one place to start is The kinds of losses, we started by talking about Sinwar's, murder that happened on the front lines. And Vijay also alluded to Hassan Nasrallah's assassination recently. There have obviously been some significant impacts to both Hamas and Hezbollah in terms of their leadership. But there's a lot going on at the border. There are Israeli attacks on UNIFIL soldiers, and there is some protest and resistance from European leadership about this. I'm wondering, maybe starting with Roqayah, if we can talk a little bit about, or hear from you a little bit about, what's the state of the resistance forces, and how are people sort of perceiving their ability to sort of hold the line and contend with this relentless attack by the Israeli occupying force.
So, despite the killing of Sayyid Hassan, what people need to realize is that Hezbollah doesn't function in a way where if you kill their leaders, they'll collapse. If anything, we saw it as they inflamed the hearts of everyone who is a supporter of the resistance even more, because we saw the killing of Sayyid Hassan as the greatest sacrifice that we can give on this path to Jerusalem. Someone who had spent over 3 decades fighting against occupation, who his own son Hadi died fighting against the occupation. Now, when it comes to the northern front, or the south of Lebanon, where Israel is trying to enter, they have, as Rayan mentioned, they have not been able to go in there because Hezbollah are the masters of hybrid guerrilla warfare. And so because of this, they will not be able to reoccupy our land, which is something they are wanting to do, mind you. This is not a theory, something made up, or us being paranoid. They've said it themselves that Lebanon is ours. Not just Palestine, not even just Lebanon. They want part of Syria. They want a part of Egypt. They want a part of Saudi. They want parts of everyone, and we're not willing to give that up. And we're seeing that manifest on the border. There have been fighters who have been speaking, saying that what we are witnessing now, which is their victories on the border, whether it's killing Israeli soldiers, destroying their tanks, their bulldozers, and not allowing them to continue into Lebanon. They said the victories that we are gaining are surpassing what we believed, and we will hear of a victory that will surpass even that of the 2006 war. So they've managed to do all this because of how Hezbollah is comprised, and how their faith in the resistance itself, because without that, honestly, there would be nothing. If there was not as much faith as we have in our resistance, we would not be able to continue, because from nothing came Hezbollah. If you look at photos of Hezbollah in the 80s, whenever they first came out, it was a handful of people. It was a handful of people. So again, this is not a confrontation between just Hezbollah and Israel in the sense that many Western commentators wish the world to believe. They've been attacking Lebanese from everywhere, and the Hizb is working as a bulwark against further incursion into Lebanon, because they see this fight as a fight for all of us. They've hit residential buildings, emergency services, hospitals. They're killing men, women, and children, not just in the densely populated Dahia, but in the south, in the north, in Baalbek, in the Ba'a, everywhere you can think of. I mean, the Lebanese health ministry is overloaded because of what Israel has done, and yet despite this, Hezbollah has continued to fight and will continue to fight, because like the Sayyid said, our red line is Gaza. If you stop the war on Gaza, we will also stop this war. But Israel, just like Vijay said, wants us to continue. This is a war that goes well beyond the borders in the south and goes well beyond Gaza. But thankfully, as we've seen, the Hezb has continued to grow in power, and we've barely seen anything. بعد ما شفنا شيء, as we say in Arabic, we still haven't seen anything yet. This is only a small bit of what Hezbollah is capable of. And we saw another part with the Hudhud video, the Hoopy video, where they were able to fly drone surveillance over Israel without being intercepted, captured God knows how much information about Israel, about their military sites, where they're keeping things, where they're storing things, about their bases. And we're going to see many more surprises in the days and weeks to come.
Thank you, Roqayah. Rayan and Vijay, I know, Rayan, you mentioned that before we even as in preparation for this that uh, you know um, we also you and Vijay had spent some time at that border area where some of these UNIFIL soldiers are, and so both of you are familiar with how things are set up down there post 2006. And we've obviously over the last few days, even just yesterday, we are, to Vijay's point about the recklessness of the IDF, reports about the attacks on the UNIFIL soldiers, the use of white phosphorus. Um, Vijay, you alluded to this sort of fracturing a little bit from the European support for what's going on in the region. I'm wondering how you see things playing out with the United Nations. It's now been how many months and how many efforts at the United Nations Security Council, and in addition with the ICJ and the ICC, and the world is still watching. And so, how has the political terrain changed at the global level? And are there any opportunities here that you see for us to actually stop this threat that Netanyahu has made to the Lebanese people that, you either engage in civil war and civil strife, or I'm going to create another Gaza in Lebanon?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan, I can go start on this because actually, right after the war in Syria, the civil conflict in Syria broke out, one of Rayan and my colleagues, Karim Makdisi, and I edited a book called The Land of Blue Helmets, the United Nations in the Arab World, a very big, quite a considerably important book, I think, had Hans von Sponeck from the UN, who was there right in Iraq. We had Filippo Grandi, who was the head of the Palestinian Agency of the UN, and then the Refugees Agency right in it. Well, one of the things we came up in that book is the UN is a multiplicity of things. There's a Security Council, but there are also the agencies. There are the Blue Helmets, UNIFIL, for instance, Irish Indian troops at the border, where Rayan and I think Bilal and others drove into one of the bases where they were all Indians, and they invited us for lunch. And we had lunch with them one day, at a UNIFIL base. I mean, the UN plays a lot of roles. And if without the UN in Gaza, there would be no schools, there would be no healthcare, there would be no cultural activities for children. UNESCO plays a very important role as a UN agency. So I'm not one of those who likes to have blanket statements about the UN. You have to understand its complexity. Secondly, it's not the UN and the UN Security Council that can't move. Let's just be quite hard-nosed about this. The United States spends over 50% of the world military budget. 75% of the world military budget is the United States and its NATO allies, plus Japan and South Korea. 75%. Okay. China spends 10% of world military spending, Russia 4%. Countries around the world do not want to antagonize the United States. I'm just saying this bluntly. They don't want to. Ryan mentioned this, but it's worth talking about again. There are at least 3 US carrier groups, including now the Eisenhower, which went out into the Eastern Mediterranean and the Gulf in August. There are at least 3 full US carrier groups in the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, and in the Gulf, in so-called Central Command space. Normally, there's about 30,000 troops. They have upped it to 40,000, what Rayan mentioned. So if you are, let's say, a Chinese vessel, and you want to break the siege in Gaza, okay? That's the shirt I'm wearing today. Lift the siege on Gaza, okay? You want to lift the siege on Gaza. A Chinese ship would have to go through a gauntlet of US military vessels in the Eastern Mediterranean. Would not be permitted. Does China want to start a war with the United States? Do the Iranians want to start a war with the United States? No. The only people who don't seem to care are the Ansar Allah forces in Yemen. And when asked about this, about their sort of lack of concern, Ansar Allah spokesman said quite directly, look, the Saudis have bombed everything. I mean, you can't bomb Sana'a. Sana'a is a UN protected city. And anybody seen Sana'a or been to Sana'a knows that, for God's sake, that would be as bad as the Taliban blowing up the Bamiyan Buddha. So the Saudis even didn't bomb Sana'a. But the Ansar Allah said, all our targets have been bombed. You can keep bombing us. There's nothing to hit. I mean, you don't know where we are. We are desert Arabs. And so they have been firing missiles at Israel. They don't care. But you can't expect a country like Iran or China or any of these countries to get directly involved, because then they are directly confronting the massive, dangerous, and, as I said, reckless US military war machine. That's the world we live in. You can pass any number of resolutions in the UN. United States doesn't give a shit. There'll be another resolution coming up on the illegal US blockade on Cuba. The vote will be 190 or 189 to 2. The 2 will be US and Israel, who will vote to maintain the illegal blockade on Cuba. The whole world hates the United States, but can't do anything to stop it. That's why I said that this ridiculous debate about, is it Israel, is it the US? Forget that debate. US and Israel hand in glove. People are too scared to confront the US. That is the reason nothing can stop. Mr. Netanyahu is going to continue his death march around the Arab lands, around Israel, just because he knows nobody can stop him. The United States is right there with him. It will continue to arm him. Germany will continue to arm Israel. They don't give a shit, excusing my Arabic.
Thanks, Vijay. Rayan, I don't know if you want to add a little bit to that, and also maybe dig in a little bit on the prospects of defeating US and Israeli ambitions in the region.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just want to follow up on Vijay's perspective around that, the US doesn't give a shit at this point. But I also want to ask him and think about a little bit of how much the US has sacrificed as far as its position during this war, supporting Israel at every corner politically and militarily. The US representative at the UN raising their bloody hands to veto another ceasefire over and over, doing away with kind of the international world order, rule-based order, whatever they call it. It's a Western controlled order that the United States and the West, used in order to have power over the global South and such. And it seems like during this time, whether it's out of stupidity, like US arrogance and stupidity, that they've cashed all this in to a certain degree, whether it's the UN, the International Court of Justice, all that stuff. In addition to cashing in kind of these institutions and ways that they were able to control things and have they also cashed in a lot of money, between 17 billion to 22 billion dollars just for Israel during this past year. We're not talking about everything else. This is according to the Watson Institute at Brown University. The cost of war project estimated between 17 and 18 billion dollars that the United States gave to Israel to carry on its genocide and now war in Lebanon. What are the limitations for a world power like that? We like to think about the US as being a waning global power, but it seems like, they still have a lot to kind of bring in order to have their way, especially in this region, especially in the Middle East, which they were supposed to be shifting out of, pivoting out to Asia, right? That was the whole idea around US foreign policy, is that the United States isn't going to be interested as much in the Arab world and the Arab-Israeli conflict and the real challenge is China. Um, but the interesting thing is they're back in, the US is totally back in. And in fact, that when Harris, Kamala Harris was asked who the biggest foe for the US in foreign policy, uh, in who she sees as the biggest enemy of the United States, she said Iran, and the biggest challenge is Iran, not China and not Russia. So it's just kind of interesting that this waning global power, I think, is trying to project power in a place where it feels like it's the strongest, in some ways. Iran doesn't even have an air force, in reality. If they go to war in Iran, they'll just carpet bomb Iran, and Iran can, has its rockets, but it doesn't have an air force. And in reality, it's no match in terms of like conventional warfare against the United States. So I kind of want to just put that out there. It's not a positive note, but that to say that, okay, it's a waning power, it still is expending a lot of resources in order to support Israel. Will this come back? And then maybe this is the question for Vijay, how he sees this. Will this come back to haunt it in one way or another, doing away with the international order, putting in all this money into the military, and going into maybe a endless war in the region? Does this put the United States at risk?
I mean, if I can come in straight away and say, look, the United States has very limited options that we need to understand. I mean, if you go back and look at the time of the financial crisis, some decisions were made, and they were not made by the United States. At the time, countries like India, China, Indonesia, and others were asked to put money into the Western banking system. And then they were disrespected because Sarkozy said publicly, we're going to close down the G7 and just manage the world through the G20. Well, they didn't close down the G7. They took money from Asia to save their banking system, but they didn't give them any political power. So these countries said, look, it's not reliable. The United States is not reliable as a market of last resort and so on. Chinese started building the Belt and Road Initiative. The Indians started building their corridors for trade. The Indonesians and others, they started doing a kind of south-south commercial, traffic, which left the United States out of it. And in that, China suddenly emerged as a major exporter of technology, including phones and so on, major exporter of technology. So the United States, at the time of the Obama administration, around 2011, 2012, suddenly discovered we got to put China back in its place. That was the pivot to China. And they desperately tried to put these countries back as being places of labor, not places of technological development, fourth, fifth generation technology. No. You can make the iPhones, but you can't develop your own Huawei phones and Honor phones and things like that. That was the US. And they discovered that, in fact, the United States can no longer directly compete commercially. The US cannot make computer chips. They have to import them from Taiwan. They can't make high-tech stuff. You can design them, but they are made overseas. So the US discovered there's no tools in the arsenal to basically extend US power except the military. So expending money on the military is actually an economic decision. It's not a real waste of money because they want to use the military to intimidate countries like China and so on, so that they voluntarily decide to surrender their advances. This is just not going to happen. So the United States is on a course of basically war against everybody if they don't obey the fact that the US is the most important country in the world. That's why the term reckless, I think, is not misused. So, it's not like the US has any other option. If you can't compete against, say, the Chinese or against the Germans building high-tech goods, then come to terms with where your economy is, find a place in the world. You're still a major power, still a rich country. Why do you have to be the first among everybody? Just become a country in the world. Take it easy. No, they have to be first. There's a kind of religious edict, the city on the hill and so on. and they'll use muscle as far as they can go. I think that's what really scares me, is that it's not China that's trying to take the world to war, or it's not even Russia that's trying to expand their war. The United States is just imposing itself everywhere over and over again. It's not like there was the Bush administration, then Obama was good, then there was, Trump bad, Biden good. That's an illusion. There's been a constant attempt to impose the US and its institutions on the world right through. Carter wasn't a good guy. Carter's the one who mined Managua Harbor after the Sandinistas took power in Managua. I mean, he's the one who authorized the attempt to overthrow the Nicaraguan revolution in 1979. That's Jimmy Carter. Later he may have become a decent guy and so on. As president, he acted as president. So I think, Rayan, in response to the question, kind of long fumbling answer to your question, is that this is a dangerous situation, which is why it is so important for people in the United States. I'm sort of repeating and underlining this point, to be building movements that change the balance of forces within the United States. You've got to be fighting to do that. Otherwise, the rest of the world is going to be destroyed. You may not understand it. Those 15, 20 people who organize a big demonstration in Oakland, you're spending 2, 3 weeks of your whole life organizing that. You're participating in saving the world, guys. Please keep at it.
Thanks, Vijay. Roqayah, I want to actually, you had said to Vijay's point that the people in the US can't afford to be helpless or feel overwhelmed, given the kind of expenditure that people in Lebanon, people in Yemen are making in resistance. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts to Vijay's point about what the role of the US left, the US movements are, and where you've seen it to be most effective, especially since unlike Gaza, where people have had a thorough political education over the last several months on the political conditions there, there are many people here in the U.S. that don't know the first thing about Lebanon or Lebanese history or Lebanese political history, and so I'm wondering how folks in Lebanon view the U.S. And what's important from the U.S. From folks in the U.S. to be doing at this juncture when things are just getting started in on the border with Lebanon.
Well, first of all, look, you don't need much of a political education to realize what's happening in Gaza needs to stop. That's that first thing people need to realize. I know that having conversations with people who are politically misinformed is difficult, but we're dealing with something that is fairly obvious on its face, that it needs to end, and it needs to end now. When it comes to how people in Lebanon feel about protesters, namely American protesters, many of them have oftentimes been shocked that now there's a public conversation about Zionism. I'm in my 30s, and I remember back in college and in high school, that word was very taboo to use because it was associated with anti-Semitism. And now people are opening up to the idea that no, this is a political ideology and a part of the colonial world's boot on our necks, so to speak, in our region. Now, I want people to know this one thing, and I think it'll put it all in perspective in terms of how we feel about protesters outside of the region. There is a poster for Aaron Bushnell, the young man who set himself on fire in support of the people of Gaza, in Harat Tahrik in the Dahia, a big one as well. Another one for Rachel Corrie, again in the Dahia. These people are considered martyrs to us, which is a very high class of person to be considered, because we believe when a martyr dies, it's not a death. They're still living amongst us. So in my opinion, no U.S. embassy or Israeli embassy around any part of the world should know peace, not a single moment of peace, whether that's staging a protest, a sleep in, a sit out in front of it. There needs to be more done to cause chaos, to bring the chaos to the imperial core, because the fact that we're now over a year into this genocide and we're still watching children be pulled out from underneath the rubble, this cannot go on. And so we're duty bound to resist it by whatever means are at our disposal. And so whether that's hosting a small protest, whatever you can, literally, there's nothing you cannot do at this point that will not help in some way, because I'm telling you, we see it here. We're watching all the student protests were big here. In Yemen, they carried a photo of Aaron Bushnell. In Yemen, they talked about how much pride they felt watching these Americans stand up to their government and say, we no longer want to be involved in this. This cannot be done in our name. So whatever you can, honestly, at this point, there's nothing you cannot do to help make this stop. Because like Vijay said, this is a long path. It's not going to happen overnight. While it won't happen overnight, the end of this genocide will happen. And also the end of the occupation will happen. And you need to ask yourself, where was I when people with so little gave so much? So again, do whatever you can do at this point, because it all makes an impact. And we see it and we hear it and we feel it ourselves when we're watching people overseas whose tax dollars go to killing us. American munitions are killing us every single day. So trust me when I tell you that we understand the commitment it takes, and we're very proud watching these people take the streets every single day.
Thanks, Roqayah. I think a lot of people on these calls will appreciate that. Rayan, I want to bring you in maybe as we can try to close out the conversation a little bit and have some final comments from everyone. Just thinking about this idea of the status and future role of the global movement for a free Palestine. Iraq has been a central part of that work here in the United States, and for a long, long time. Wondering if you can give your perspective on where things are headed and where energies should be deployed.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate Roqayah and Vijay's comments about building this movement, continuing to build this movement around free Palestine, a global movement, and to understand that what's happened over the last year is the building of the biggest Palestine movement in history. What exists now as a result of all the protests, small, big, direct actions that happened, and not just in the United States, all over, big protests, the city council resolutions for ceasefires, all the political education like this one that's been happening. It's definitely moved us to another place as far as a global movement for a free Palestine. We know that these things take a while to develop into tipping things over, especially when we're faced with such imperial, violent, intransigent forces. But at the same time, what we've been able to accomplish, we as in kind of everybody that's been out there for Palestine for the last year, has been historic, right? It's been incredible, and we have to kind of maintain that and not despair. It's not easy because also what we heard from Vijay, in terms of the United States doesn't care at this stage because of its position in the world, in the sense that it feels like it needs to do what it's doing in terms of supporting Israel, projecting its power in the region and such. But we need to keep things in perspective as far as historically how long these resistance forces against colonial powers take. How do we support it? How do we keep the narrative around Palestine front and center in terms of what's happening, for example, in the United States as far as foreign policy? At times, it's always like kind of set aside, and I don't think that's going to happen anymore. There's a lot of awareness and consciousness that's been raised. We're building power in the West, but also the global South. I hope that some of that also reaches the streets, the Arab streets, in this next phase. I have some confidence that that'll happen. No one who's witnessed what's happened over the last year hasn't been changed. We've all been changed as a result of this genocide. And that's going to mean a new phase of resisting resisting, protesting, and fighting back against the U.S. empire. And
Thanks,
I'll
Rayan. I want to just maybe close out with Vijay and Roqayah with some closing comments. Vijay, you can take this where you want to go, but I think a lot of us have looked to the Tricontinental's analysis about what's happening more globally and how this conflict is situated in the larger decline of U.S. empire and this period of hyper-imperialism, as you have the Tricontinental has framed it. Um, I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of that broader perspective, and help us understand, whether it's, the bigger question about how we get to a free Palestine, the actual road to that, or how we really overcome these imperial forces in the long term and what keeps us steady through these more difficult times. And as Rayan and Roqayah have alluded to, there is a extermination campaign happening right as we speak in Jabalia, and it's very difficult for people to sort of understand that the timeline is that these things take time, but also that there's an immediacy that must also be met. And so anything you can do to sort of give us that perspective, on how we approach these things as a movement.
I mean, I just feel like the weakness that we have has to be acknowledged a little bit. It is extraordinary that the Belgian trade unions decided we are not going to ship anything to Israel, anything that could be a weapon. There were protests in South Africa. The Indian Dockers Union said we're not going to load any weapons to Israel. I mean, all of these are greatly heartening and important, but the machine of war has been built in such a way that it's very difficult to touch it. Like, do we even know whether 2,000-pound bombs are loaded to be transited to Israel? Do we know where the warehouses for those are? Are they even sitting in the United States, or are they sitting in an offshore base? United States has over 900 bases around the world. Where are these bombs sitting? Are they in Saudi Arabia? Is that where they are being transited from? Are they sitting in Egypt? Is that where they are being transited from? We don't know. They have built a war machine of immense secrecy, and that actually paralyzes us. The other thing is that there is a way in which the left, in a way globally, eats itself, on a lot of these things. Minor differences of opinion make for enormous internal attacks and so on. Like, for instance, some people don't believe in mass peaceful demonstrations. They want to do direct action. I don't see why these should be in debate, as if you can't do a million things. Do what you can. A young person is too scared to go to a mass demonstration, but they say, I'm going to send an email to my friends and say, listen, this is terrible, right? That's a good gesture. Everybody has to do something. The left eats itself in debates and internal conflicts. And I mean, I'm just telling you a personal story. I'm going to New Zealand and then Australia. In New Zealand, the universities, one of them at least, University of Western Australia, said he can't come on campus to speak about Palestine. So they have deplatformed the situation on the campus. That's okay. We'll have it off campus in a trade union hall. Anyway, it's a better place to hold it. Okay. So that's that. But then some people circulate a petition saying, deplatform him because he's a genocide denier. I mean, listen, firstly, we are all together trying to stop a real genocide taking place in Palestine. We have some difference of opinion about China. Why make that the central issue right now? We are all standing firm with the Palestinian people against a live stream genocide. And some people on the left want to have a debate and discussion about the Uyghurs. I mean, for God's sake, who's working for the CIA here? So I just think that the left has to get its act together. We have to focus strategically. Our principal line of unity has to be to do whatever we can with whatever tactical flexibility to end the genocide in Palestine, to end the occupation in Palestine, to allow Lebanon to be a sovereign country, to return the Golan Heights to Syria, and so on. I mean, that's the strategic objective, because you've got to prevent the escalation of a war with Iran, which is going to bring the Russians in. We don't want that, for God's sake. The whole left has to coalesce around that. You want to have other debates, there's going to be time to have them. This, my friends, is not the time to debate tactics over how to stop a genocide. Do whatever you can, whatever way you can, but for God's sake, do it.
Thank you, Vijay. And Rukai, I'm wondering, I want to close out with you on this same note about the urgency. You're in ostensibly or in actuality a war zone right now that is under attack in Beirut. And as a journalist, I know that you have been doing the rounds trying to um, provide the insight on the political conditions there and the reality of what the Lebanese people are experiencing and how they are operating and responding to the conditions. I'm wondering if you can also provide us with, some closing thoughts, being on the front lines of this about this sense of urgency and how it should be managed.
So first, what I think should be understood is that Israel now is in a real predicament. And Vijay and Rayan touched on that. Israel is facing an existential threat and the complete disintegration of Israel as an entity and even as a society. It's been over a year now that this genocide has been going on. And today, Israelis are aware of one thing, which is they're facing a deep strategic loss that's been inflicted on them, and one that arguably cannot ever be repaired. They've achieved nothing, despite how many people they've killed, despite how many leaders they've killed, while the resistance across the region has mobilized like never before, from Lebanon to Iraq, Iran, Syria. And in the South, we follow a kind of Fanonian principle, which is that the land brings freedom and dignity, which is why our connection to Palestine is so ironclad, and why, despite everything that we're facing here in Lebanon, that even before the genocide happened, why we refused to relinquish even an inch. The strength of the will of our resistance on the battlefield has helped the Palestinian resistance. And I'll make one final point. I think will emphasize how I feel about this, which is that the occupier only understands one language, the language of power and the language of the gun. And on the battlefield, we're fluent in both. And because of that, we will be victorious. And I'm hoping that, as Vijay said, from wherever you are around the world, you will do whatever you can, because there's nothing too small at all. So whatever you can to help make this stop, do it, and do it now.
Rukai, thanks so much. Ryan, let's close out with you. I want you to maybe help us sort of think about this also from the perspective of those of us in the Bay Area who have been following Iraq's leadership on this work, and as Vijay and Roqayah have said, in doing all of the things that we possibly can to engage in this struggle of solidarity.
Yeah, actually, I'm not going to add too much more to the eloquence of Vijay and Roqayah there at the very end, in terms of maintaining the momentum within the belly of the beast. That's where most of us are, and probably on this webinar. And we're in the Bay Area. We've done all sorts of different actions. We've used different tactics, and we just can't lose track of the fact that things have moved. Maybe not on the elite scale of the U.S. government or the U.S. war machine, but we're building a movement. And as you know, Thomas, there's so many actions and things that you can get involved in. In the Bay Area, you can go to the AROC website, to the events calendar. That's the ArabOrganizing.org website. And you can see every single day, there is literally 3 or 4 things going on that have to do with Palestine. I urge everybody to stay engaged and not despair. I think that's the most important thing at a time like this. And also recognize that we're in the heat of the battle, give each other some space, the reality of what we all went through, the trauma of even just fighting from here in the belly of the beast for what's going on there, experiencing that trauma of what's happening to our people. But we need to continue. There's no other option to continue to fight back here in the United States, but also globally. I also want to just thank Vijay and Roqayah, Thomas and Samer, and everybody that helped organize